Welcome to Whispers in the Wind, stories of true crime.
Near the top?
Yes.
What did he report as being the injuries?
He reported getting hit in the back of the head and in the back. Did not have any pain when I was talking with him. The only pain was on his butt from hitting the stones on the river.
Did he report any kind of injury to his ears?
He had reported that someone told him there was blood on his ear. Part of my examination, I do look in the ears with an otoscope, and I did not note anything worth mentioning. No injuries or anything like
Did you
that.
see any blood in his ear?
No, not at that time.
Did he report which ear he supposedly had blood from? If you know, or did you check both ears?
I checked both ears, but I do not remember which ear specifically.
Down towards the bottom of page 5, there's a category that indicates statements made by a suspect during the exam.
Yes.
Did you fill that part out?
Yes, I did.
What kind of statements did Mr. Miu make to you during the exam?
One statement was, there were about 7 people on top of me, hitting me in the back of the head and on the back. I don't know with what. A second statement made was, they just attacked me, they called me a child rapist. A third statement made was, a guy pulled a knife on me, I took his wrist and turned it into his belly.
When he was reporting his injuries to you, did he make any mention of being struck in the face? If you recall?
I do not recall directly.
Did he make any mention of being strangled?
Not to my recollection.
Right, and if he had, would you have noted that?
Yes.
Did you examine his neck and throat area?
Yes.
Did you find anything that would indicate that he had been strangled?
No, not that I have noted.
You examined his face?
Yes.
Did you see any bruising or cuts?
I noted a 2 centimeter by 1 centimeter abrasion to his posterior head, so the back of the head.
Right. How about his face? Did you notice anything to his face?
Nothing to the outside of his face. On the inside of his left cheek, there was an abrasion.
All right. On the outside of his face, did you see any puffiness or swelling?
No, not that I recall.
Any red marks of any kind?
No, not that I recall.
You did talk about an abrasion to the inside of his cheek. Did he tell you how that happened?
Yes.
What did
Said,
he tell you?
I bit it when I was attacked.
With regard to the abrasion on the back of his head, is that at the top of his head or at the lower part of his head?
It's at the base
All right.
of his skull.
Was his hair covering it, if you know?
I do not recall. Where I have it drawn is kind of right where that hairline would be.
All right. And did he tell you how he received the abrasion to the back of his head?
Yes, he said I was hit back there.
All right. Did you note any swellings or bleeding on the back of his head?
No.
And I would imagine there's times when you've dealt with people who are victims of an attempted assault, correct?
Yes.
There's certainly times when somebody comes in and they said, somebody was trying to assault me and attack me and I fended them off, correct?
Yes.
I defended myself in some way, correct?
Yes.
You would still do an examination, correct?
Yes.
You would agree that person's still a victim of assault, correct?
Yes.
Whether that assault is completed or not completed, they're still a victim, correct?
Yes.
And in that sense, you deal with these victims of violence, correct?
Yes.
And you would agree that victims of violence often suffer physical injury, correct?
Yes.
But also psychological trauma.
Yes.
They're victims of trauma, correct?
Correct.
And I would imagine you have a lot of training and experience in dealing with people who are in the acute phase of dealing with some trauma that they've suffered, correct?
Yes.
And it maybe changes over time how that shows, correct?
Yes.
I would imagine you've seen some people within minutes, if not within an hour, of the trauma that they've suffered, right?
Yes.
And then you've seen some people maybe 24 hours or later, correct?
Yes.
And how people, the signs that they might show of that trauma might depend upon when you see them on that time continuum, correct?
Yes.
As somebody is closer in time to the event, their trauma might be more acute, correct?
Yes.
And as somebody, time goes on, that might be harder for you to observe, correct?
Yes.
Because obviously a lot of the psychological trauma is internal, correct?
Yes.
You're noting physical injuries, right?
Correct.
But it's hard for you to know what's going on inside that person's brain or body, right?
Yes, unless they tell me.
Unless they tell you, correct? And I would imagine sometimes in those positions, people who are victims of violence, victims suffering from trauma, they may not be in the best time to fully disclose the trauma that they've just suffered, correct?
Correct.
One of the things that I'm sure you're trained on is how to get that information from somebody, correct?
Correct.
Because sometimes that's difficult to do when the person has just suffered some life-altering trauma, correct?
Yes.
And it's not unusual for you, in your experience, to know that these victims of violence may not be in the best position to tell you things right away, right?
Correct.
Because the trauma, it impacts that person, correct?
Yes.
It impacts how their body functions, right?
Correct.
And in fact, in here, you took a pulse of Mr. Miu, correct?
Yes.
And his resting heart rate was 91, correct?
Correct.
You would agree that that's elevated, correct?
It depends on the person. Some people do have more elevated resting heart rates. So I would not, at this first meeting, be able to determine if that was elevated or not, as I had not received any other medical history about Mr. Miu.
Sure. You're a nurse, though, right?
Yep.
You've taken people's heart rates quite a bit, correct?
Yes.
Would you agree that a resting heart rate of 91 for a 52-year-old male is outside the normal range of what you would expect for a resting heart rate?
Yes.
It's elevated, correct?
Yes, slightly.
And that might have an impact on them, correct?
Yes.
What you see sometimes for victims of trauma is sometimes that those victims may have a foggy mind, correct?
Yes.
May not have the best memory, correct?
Correct.
Or even if they have the memory, they may not be in the best position to retrieve that memory.
Correct.
Or even if they can retrieve the memory, they may not be in the best position to disclose that memory, correct?
Correct.
Sometimes the violence done upon somebody might be so impactful that they're just not in a position to talk about it, correct?
Yes.
And you certainly know sometimes that people who are victims of violence, they also might just get inaccurately report the violence that was done to them, correct?
Sometimes, yes, correct.
Yep, because if violence is being done to a person, that's obviously a high-stress situation, correct?
Yes.
And that might impact their memory of the event, correct?
Yes.
And this is all things that you've dealt with when you've dealt with people who are victims of violence, correct?
Yes.
And the same holds true even if that person thankfully was able to fight off the assault being done to them, correct?
Objection, Your Honors, to the speculation foundation, stating facts not in evidence.
I'm asking her in general.
Overruled.
Would you agree?
Yes.
Thank you for joining me here at Whispers in the Wind. If you enjoy this channel, please like, share, and subscribe.